Good afternoon. My name is Paul Minett, and I'm speaking to you from Auckland, New Zealand. Also here is my friend and colleague, John Niles from Seattle. Together, we'll facilitate this workshop entitled Reimagining Passenger Transport for Reduced Congestion and Better Accessibility. The workshop is based on research we've carried out at the Minett Transportation Institute in San Jose, California, called Congestion Clearing Payments to Passengers. I thank the organizers for deciding to include this workshop in the ÖffiCON program. We hope you find the workshop useful and that it generates some ideas you can use to improve mobility in places that you care about. The workshop is in 4 parts. First, I'll describe our research. Second, my colleague John will facilitate a discussion with you to answer your questions and make sure we've been clear about the ideas we presented. In part 3, we hope you'll join one of several breakout groups to share impressions with each other and consider some cities and mobility environments you know about where you think the concepts we've shared might be useful to make daily commuting more efficient and green. We're hopeful you will come up with some actual places where further study and even pilot projects might be appropriate. We'll ask you to consider barriers and enablers that might exist in those locations. Finally, in part 4, we'll have a wrap-up session where we'll ask for a report back from each breakout group about what they discussed. Hopefully, some next steps will emerge for you or me or John or all of us collectively to act on in the near future. As I present our research, if you have any comments or questions, please do type them, preferably in English, into the chat box as we go along. This will help John organize the next session and will help make sure you don't forget your comments or questions as the presentation proceeds. Please use the chat box in the bottom left of the screen. So to my presentation. Our project was called Congestion Clearing Payments to Passengers. We looked into the use of incentives to reward people for traveling as passengers through bottleneck locations. A bottleneck is where something causes the traffic to slow down. Most common is a situation where the number of lanes of road is reduced, say from 2 lanes to 1, but also sometimes when a change in the road, such as a corner or a hill, or even a distraction off the road, causes predictable, recurrent traffic congestion. What you see here is a passenger on a bus receiving an incentive for crossing a bottleneck line. The technology to make this work already exists. The main cause of traffic congestion is an excess of concurrent drivers given the amount of road, especially at bottlenecks. Many people say traffic congestion is caused by there being too many cars, but we say the cars did not decide to be there, the drivers did. Options for removing congestion include increasing the amount of road, convincing people to travel at different times or different routes or not at all, or getting drivers to switch to being passengers. We focused on the last of these. The last 2 of these mitigation options are often covered by congestion pricing, also known as tolls. We sometimes refer to our approach as reverse tolls. Our approach is agnostic as to which passenger mode people would switch to: bus, van pool, carpool, or shared ride hail. In case you're not familiar with these terms, a traditional carpool is where people share a ride in a private car, often on a turnabout basis, such as each person being the driver 1 week in 3. Efforts aimed at using technology to form dynamic carpools are a fantastic idea, but thus far have had limited success. A van pool is an arrangement where a transportation management agency or an employer provides a van that as many as 12 people will share, one of whom will regularly drive, usually everyone paying a monthly subscription towards the costs. Uber Pool and Lyft Line are arrangements where ride-hail passengers receive a discount for being prepared for their ride-hail vehicle to pick up an additional passenger on the way to their destination, or to get into such a vehicle that already has 1 or more passengers on board. Our goal was to find out if there's a level of incentive that would convince enough people to travel as passengers that the vehicle volume would be reduced sufficiently to clear congestion on a target route. What you see on the graph is that as the amount of incentive increases on the vertical axis, the number of people traveling as passengers increases, and the number of people driving alone falls until you reach a point where the congestion is cleared. This point is not predetermined. It has nothing to do with where or if the other lines meet. Having cleared congestion, our goal was to keep the congestion permanently cleared for a time horizon that we set at 20 years, so that our analysis would match the type of analysis done for highway projects. Here you see the current traffic at, say, 140% of vehicle demand compared with capacity, then falling as the solution is implemented to 100% or perhaps lower, and maintained at that level through year 20. An important insight from this chart is that once congestion has been reduced, all subsequent growth in people trips on the route must be absorbed as passengers. There can be no increase in vehicle counts. We focused our investigation on a heavily trafficked, congested commuter highway in California from Half Moon Bay to San Mateo, that has long had a big traffic queue at the bottleneck just outside the city of Half Moon Bay. Multiple lanes of road reduced to just one lane heading east towards Silicon Valley. We turned our analysis of this route into a case study. Our purpose was to provide a method for this type of investigation that would enable comparing the use of incentives on the one hand with other solutions that might be proposed, such as adding new lanes or new routes or new public transportation services or congestion pricing on the other hand, to solve capacity problems within a transport system. We described a 6-step method. I want to start by telling you the end of the story, that we found that this solution could work on the case study route. For every dollar spent on the solution, we estimate the community in the case study would gain $4.50 of benefits. This is a net present value or NPV terms. Our modeling estimated that the solution would generate $640 million of benefits. Those are 2019 US dollars, while incurring 141 million 2019 US dollars of costs, with both the benefits and the costs spread over 20 years, discounted at 3%. This is a net gain of $500 million US dollars. Pointing out a couple of key items, incentives come to $100 million. The impact of spending the incentives we valued at $176 million. Many more people get across the route. And we valued new employment opportunities at 127 million. Reduced inconvenience was valued at 112 million. We estimate the solution would also reduce carbon emissions by 181,000 tons over the 20 years. So as a decarbonization project, it would have co-benefits in the order of $2,800, those are US dollars, per ton of emissions avoided. The main tool we used in our project that provided most of the information was a survey of people in the catchment for the case study route. The survey was carried out in August 2019, so the results are fully pre-pandemic. We think, however, that the survey tool will be appropriate for use in the post-pandemic era. The purpose of the survey was to enable us to estimate how many people would travel as passengers at different levels of financial incentive, whether there would be a level of incentive that would be sufficient to clear congestion and keep it cleared day after day, and how the traffic, and therefore the cost of the solution, would change over time once congestion was cleared, bearing in mind that we wanted to keep the congestion away for 20 years. We established from the survey that about half the people in the case study residential suburbs who were users or potential future users of the route would be prepared to travel as passengers if it was easy to do and if the deal was right. while about half the others would be prepared to provide rides. The remainder only wanted to drive alone. And this is particular to the Highway 92 Half Moon Bay to San Mateo route. Other routes might find different answers. We asked the people who were prepared to travel as passengers what they thought of each alternative mode they could use for passenger travel: bus, van pool, or shared ride hail like Uber Pool or Lyft Line. We elicited information about their perception of each mode by getting respondents to think about each mode and to tell us how much effort it would take for them to use the mode, and then how much they would need to be paid to offset that effort. So firstly, we asked them to tell us on a 100-point scale how much effort it would take for them to travel as a passenger by bus, van pool, and carpool, where 0 would be no effort at all, and 100 would be a great amount of effort. We didn't ask about shared ride hail because we defined shared ride hail as being picked up from home and assumed it would involve no effort at all. Here you see an example of how a respondent might have answered by sliding the buttons across, with the survey tool generating a number to correspond to the amount of effort they are indicating. Here's the result of the effort question about taking the bus. Some people said it would not take much effort, but 3/4 saw the effort needed being above 50, with the average at 83. And you can see that average, the little X in the middle there, that's the average. Many people thought the bus would involve a great amount of effort and rated it at 100. Here's the effort that people perceive for van pooling. Here, the average rating is 68. You see the little X in there. This is statistically significant difference compared with taking the bus at an average rating of 83. It is seen as much easier to use a van pool than the bus. Finally, we see the carpool effort. The average effort rating for carpooling is 60. You see the X, maybe see the X in there. Carpooling is seen as taking less effort than both the bus at 83 or van pools at 68. Again, these are statistically significant differences. The magnitude of the differences in these effort ratings should be a concern for people who provide bus services on the case study route, and perhaps in other locations as well. Next, we asked potential passengers to tell us how much incentive they would need to be paid each day, if any, to offset the effort of each mode, assuming they would be offered an incentive to take that mode and that it would not take any extra time to take that mode. The amounts they could choose from went from $0 to as high as they wanted, and they also had an option of saying no amount would be enough. Those who chose the latter option we would consider to be unavailable for that route. This shows an example of the amounts respondents could choose from. To give the daily amounts context, we showed an annual equivalence. Respondents also had the option of filling in their own different daily amount. The results of this question can be seen on this chart. What this chart shows us is that if it took no extra time to travel as a passenger, some proportion of potential passengers would require no incentive at all. We interpret their answer as meaning a net benefit. So if the ride was free, 48% of potential passengers would travel by a shared ride-hail vehicle for no additional incentive, while between 20 and 30% of potential passengers would travel by bus, carpool, or van pool at that same zero incentive level. As an example of how to interpret this chart, for an incentive of $10 per day, about 70% of potential passengers would travel by bus, 83% would travel by van pool, 87% by shared ride-hail, and 90% by carpool. The critically interesting point here is that 26% of the potential passengers said they are unavailable for travel by bus. No amount of incentive would get them to take the bus, while 100% of them would be prepared to carpool. We took the information from this chart, these prices from this chart, and converted it into a single reward curve using the lowest incentive each respondent had indicated between the different routes. This chart is the result. This chart shows the proportion of commuters we estimate would switch to being passengers at the different price levels. For an incentive of about $15 a day, almost half of all commuters would switch to being passengers. But here's a new issue we found in our modeling. The shape of travel demand changes if congestion is relieved. Our survey had told us that about 88% of commuters on the case study route are currently departing home at a time that is different to what they would prefer. We had asked all respondents if their trip pattern would change if congestion went away. What existing commuters told us was that if congestion were removed, they would adjust their departure times from home to work. Also, some people who were not already traveling the route said they would start to use the route during peak if congestion were removed. Our modeling showed that the change in traffic times and new commuters together would cause the traffic queue to rebuild, returning the highway to a congested state for some of the morning period. What these two charts show is the existing shape of travel demand on the left, every half hour through the morning on the case study route, and the demand that would exist if congestion went away. You see on the second chart that the true peak of peak demand is half an hour later than the existing peak of peak and very much larger. We resolved this problem of the rebuilding queue by hypothetically introducing an additional graduated incentive for going early that would increase the reward for people who travel as passengers outside the peak of the peak period. This concept of a going early bonus had not been included in our survey, so it will need to be tested in future surveys. I've mentioned a couple of times how people in our survey did not see the bus as a viable option, while they would be prepared to carpool for a lower level of incentive. What this calls into question for us is the dichotomy that pervades in mobility thinking between public transport on the one hand and private transport on the other. Travel by carpool is arguably by private transport, but each boarding in a carpool is as beneficial to the transport system as a boarding on a bus, because each passenger boarding, regardless of which shared mode it uses, reduces solo driving. Hence, we prefer the term shared passenger transport to describe more desirable shared forms in which at least two of the people traveling in a vehicle are going to a common destination area. Changing these words at a policy level could have a profound impact on the management of the transportation system, making it more likely that more people would find ways to travel as passengers. Our work, therefore, proposes two new directions for the transformation of mobility: the use of incentives to encourage people to travel as passengers at congestion clearing levels, and the possibility that it would be easier and less costly to encourage passenger travel in privately owned cars as carpools than on public transport. Our findings are particular to the case study route in the Silicon Valley area of California. We've yet to test our survey on other routes to see if we would get similar responses. Perhaps when people said no amount of money would get me to take the bus, they were thinking only the existing limited bus services available on the case study route and not reflecting something about their personal preferences. Perhaps on other routes, a greater or lesser proportion of people would be prepared to travel as passengers, or provide rides for other people, or be prepared to take the bus at a lower incentive. These are all considerations for future investigation and perhaps discussion at this workshop. The key question is whether this concept of incentives is interesting enough, given the results we've shared today, for it to be worth replicating the survey and analysis for other routes in the USA, Germany, and beyond. Our project was completed with a report that's available at the links shown here. Also, if you Google congestion clearing payments to passengers, it's easy to find. The report details all the assumptions and calculations that led to our conclusions. The chart that I shared this afternoon of the perceptions of effort needed to take each alternative mode was not included in the report. It was prepared specially for this workshop and this is the first time this information has been shared publicly. There are many other interesting findings described in our report, but for the purposes of the workshop today, I've shared what I consider to be the most important key points. I encourage you to read the report. That concludes my presentation. John?